It's just gone past 1800 hours GMT. You're watching Al Jazeera live from Doha. If you're just joining us, we've been watching breaking news out of Israel, where the centrist politician Benny Gantz has announced his resignation from the Israeli war cabinet. This is an announcement that was expected. Benny Gantz was supposed to announce this on Saturday, in fact, but that was delayed after Israel's massive operation in the Nuseirat refugee camp in Gaza, which saw the release of 4 Israeli captives from Gaza, but also the killing of 274 Palestinian men, women and children. Benny Gantz had been threatening to resign for weeks now from the war cabinet if Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu didn't come up with a post-war plan for Gaza. In his resignation speech just now, he called on Israeli citizens and those serving in the army to remain committed. He said Netanyahu doesn't care about his people, doesn't care if his people are being killed. And he said he would do everything, he would continue to do everything to bring back the captives from Gaza. He also called on the Defense Minister of Israel, Yoav Gallant, to be brave and do what is right, in his own words. Benny Gantz's resignation leaves Prime Minister Netanyahu more reliant on far-right allies of his government. Let's bring in Sara Khairat for the first reactions to this resignation. Sara is joining us from Jordan's capital, Amman, because Israel has banned Al Jazeera from reporting from within Israel. Sara, as I said, we were expecting this resignation. Benny Gantz announcing his out of this war cabinet. What happens now?
Yeah, this is a big announcement, and it was very clear what he was saying. He was pinning the blame on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for it already being 8 months since this war started, and still more than 100 captives are still in the Gaza Strip. It's not clear whether they're dead or alive. When he was asked what next, does this allow or bring the far ultra-nationalist far-right members like Itamar Ben-Gvir, the National Security Minister? You have, for example, Bezalel Smotrich. He'd been asked by some of the journalists about this. Does this give them more space, more influence in where the direction of this war goes? And he said that he hopes that the Prime Minister, as well as Yoav Gallant, he said, do the right thing. And he said that he also supports any option. He said, yes, it was good to see that these 4 captives were rescued, but he said he would support any option that would bring the remaining captives home. And this was the sticking point for him. This is a man with a glowing military career. He has been involved in the Lebanon war. He's also been a defense minister previously. He's held several military and political roles. He was brought into the fold just after October the 7th to become part of this war cabinet, a small team that made executive decisions on what happened in the Gaza Strip. The sticking point for him came a few weeks ago when he had said to the Prime Minister, you need to decide what your post-war plan is. What is the end result of this war that keeps on continuing? And we're still not getting those results that we expected. Of course, that post-war plan never emerged, and he had said that he was going to quit if that was going to happen, if he didn't have a concrete plan. Where does this leave the government now? His party has 8 seats. It's not a majority. It's a coalition government. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the longest-serving prime minister in Israel's history, came back into the fold as prime minister because of this coalition that he joined his Likud party with the ultra-far-right parties within this government. Now, where does it leave the government? It doesn't necessarily have major repercussions. Like I said, only a small number of seats, but it could change the calculus, if you like, for what comes next, and certainly in terms of Yoav Gallant, if he was to decide to quit. And whether this will put more pressure on the Prime Minister himself, we'll have to wait and see. This is something that the families of the captives, tens of thousands of protesters every single Saturday, have been pushing for, and they had actually been calling on Benny Gantz to resign.
Sara, thank you very much for that. That's Sara Khairat live for us there in Amman. And we're going to have plenty of reaction and analysis to Benny Gantz's resignation throughout this news hour on Al Jazeera. But first, let's take a closer look at who he is. Benny Gantz, the retired army general, was Israel's defense minister between 2020 and 2022. During this time, more than 250 Palestinians were killed in the 2021 war on Gaza. He was the chief of staff of the Israeli military from 2011 to 2015. Culhane. During the 2014 war on Gaza, more than 2,000 Palestinians were killed. A civil lawsuit filed in 2018 sought damages from Gantz and blamed him for violating international humanitarian law by deliberately targeting civilians. A Dutch court rejected the case. Let's now bring in Patty Culhane, who's in Washington, D.C. for us. Patty, Benny Gantz was, of course, a favoured interlocutor for Washington in these past few months during this war on Gaza. He was engaged in talks with the Biden administration, travelled to the U.S. How does his resignation, how is that going to be viewed in Washington, and how will it impact the peace plan, which was announced by President Biden just over a week ago?
Well, that's going to be the big question people in Washington are going to be talking about. Obviously, this wasn't all that unexpected because he had made the threat in advance, but it will not be welcome news from the Biden administration. I should point out we haven't had any reaction yet. I expect we probably will sometime today, but as you know, the president is in Europe traveling back to the United States today. But we do know that Secretary of State Antony Blinken, he's going to be in the region. We know that he's going to do at least 4 stops. Really what we've seen is this is the administration really trying to pressure Israel into a ceasefire. Any move that makes Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu more reliant on the far right wing will not be welcome, because the U.S. truly does think that this is the best deal possible. And it's been interesting, too. We saw Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor. He was on all the Sunday shows, and he kept saying what we've heard from countless state briefings, Department of Defense briefings, White House briefings. They keep insisting that this is an Israeli proposal, because we haven't actually heard the prime minister come out and say, it is our proposal, we're going to agree to this. They're putting all the pressure and saying repeatedly that the minute Hamas says yes, then this deal can go into place. Is that going to be less likely now that Israel is going to, in fact, say, yes, this is our proposal, yes, we agree, now that there's more far-right wing elements in the war cabinet? That's going to be the fear. This is not a step that the U.S. wanted to see taken.
Thank you, Patty, for that. Patty Culhane live there in Washington, D.C. Well, let's now speak to Haggai Matar, who's executive director of Plus 972 magazine, which provides independent commentary and news from Israel and Palestine. He's joining us from Tel Aviv. Thank you so much for being with us. As Sara, our correspondent, mentioned there, Benny Gantz's resignation is not enough to bring down the government, Prime Minister Netanyahu's government. But what impact will it have, do you think? Will it significantly destabilize the government?
I think that remains to be seen, as Sarah said. And what we are likely to see is a little bit more civil unrest. How much civil unrest is really dependent on the mood of the people. I think at this point, one would have expected more protests, much more forceful out on the streets, the kind of which we have seen up until October 7th last year against this government. We haven't seen that sort of explosion, that size, that energy of the protest movement. That might happen now, but also I think what we've learned over the past few months is that in a period of wartime, people are much more hesitant to go out and demonstrate against the government. Will that change when Gantz is out? We don't know. The other factor that may change is the international standing of Israel, which has been deteriorating anyway. I think the U.S. has definitely been kind of banking on Gantz to be a positive factor in this government. And without him, there will be very little aids, very little friendly faces for Western governments to find in this government.
The National Security Minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, before Gantz announced his resignation, said that he would demand increase over government decisions, including in the war cabinet. What is this going to mean now? Will this mean that he, Itamar Ben-Gvir, and Smotrich also will have more power over the Gaza war and the direction the conflict takes?
I'm not certain that Netanyahu will actually give any of them that bonus, that upgrade into the war cabinet. That remains to be seen. He has not indicated that he would yet. And I have to say I'm quite pessimistic about the notion that under one set of personalities in the war cabinet, we would have a more moderate war, and under a different set, we would have a more extreme war. I think what we're seeing now is already pretty extreme, the levels of violence and massacres against Palestinians in Gaza. is outrageous. And it's worth mentioning that even now, when Gantz was resigning from the government, was talking about the day after, at the same time, in a way that's somewhat contradictory, he also said that this war will continue for years. This is something he has been saying repeatedly while in government, and even now as he's leaving it, criticizing Netanyahu for not taking the prisoner deal and anything like that, he still says that we need to continue this war for years, and the Israeli public needs to be prepared for that.
Yeah.
So I think the difference between him and Itamar Ben-Gvir and Netanyahu is probably not as significant as many would have wanted to see.
I was going to ask you about that, in fact. I mean, as we saw, Benny Gantz doesn't exactly have a clean record when it comes to Palestine. I mean, thousands of Palestinians have been killed under his watch. What would have been different if he were in power after October the 7th?
Exactly. I think probably very little. We also know, also from our reporting, that Benny Gantz was involved in making the decision to go after Palestinian civil society and human rights organizations and brand them as terrorist organizations because they were targeting him as a central figure for ICC indictments. They were passing information against him to the ICC, hoping to see warrants come out against him for the war crimes he's responsible for in previous wars, which is why he went to outlaw them. So we really have this history of someone who is in no way a peacenik or in any way committed to anything but military solutions. And I think the way that he's glorified or signaled as an opposition, as an alternative to Netanyahu, is very concerning considering what he's actually offering.
Indeed. So where does this now leave the plan announced by President Biden a week ago, a plan which he said was an Israeli plan to end the war on Gaza?
The chances of the Netanyahu government actually taking this plan without Gantz in the government, I think, have decreased. It's not very likely. And even if the government was to accept this plan, which is highly unlikely, the chances that it would commit to Biden's definition of the plan proposed by Israel, which actually means the end of the war, is absolutely zero. We're seeing the situation where for Hamas, they're saying there's no deal unless there's a hard commitment to end the war. And Israel is saying we will do anything to get back our hostages except committing to ending the war. That gap has been there for months now, and I don't see that changing in any way.
Yeah, just briefly internally, I mean, as you say, we're not clear yet as to how people will react to Gantz's resignation. But do you think Gantz, can consolidate opposition to bring Netanyahu down?
He will definitely try to do so. Gantz is not a very shrewd politician, but he's wise enough to know when to leave. He's been staying inside of the government, understanding that there's a portion of society that opposes Netanyahu, but thinks that this is a time to come together. And that portion of society, he now thinks, is moving away from that position, is saying, we need to topple this government. Will it be enough to actually structure the existing coalition, the 64-seat coalition that Netanyahu holds, a majority coalition that he still holds, is yet to be seen. I don't think that is very likely, but if the pressure on the streets becomes insurmountable, if international pressure becomes insurmountable, we might see the coalition crumbling. But I don't think that's to be expected in the very near future.
Haggai Matar, thank you so much for bringing us the view there from Israel. Haggai Matar is Executive Director of Plus 972 magazine, joining us there from Tel Aviv. We appreciate your insight and time.
Thank you.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.